For 12,000 years, the Vortak Empire had swept across the galaxy like a tide of death. Their massive warships, each the size of a small moon, had crushed every civilization they encountered. Entire species had been wiped from existence, their worlds left as barren wastelands. The Vortak were the ultimate predators, 8-foot-tall reptilian beings with natural armor, razor-sharp claws, and an insatiable hunger for conquest. They had never known defeat. They had never known fear. Until now. Deep in the outer rim of the galaxy, in a system so insignificant that it didn't even have a proper designation in their star charts, something impossible had happened. The mighty Vortak Third Fleet, 100,000 warriors aboard 50 of their most advanced dreadnoughts, had simply vanished. No distress calls. No debris fields. No survivors. Just silence where the roar of conquest should have been. The species responsible called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue world that shouldn't have posed any threat to anyone. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom. They were soft, fragile creatures who lived barely a century. But, as Admiral Kregstar would soon discover, humanity's greatest weapons weren't written in their DNA. They were written in their spirit. And, when cornered, when fighting for everything they held dear, these seemingly weak creatures would teach the galaxy's apex predators what true terror really meant. The age of Vortak supremacy was about to end. The age of humanity was about to begin. Admiral Kregstar stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of the Vortak Dominion's capital ship, his massive claws clicking against the metal deck plating. His reptilian eyes, cold and calculating, studied the three-dimensional star map that showed the outer reaches of the galaxy. Red markers indicated conquered systems, and there were thousands upon thousands of them, stretching across multiple spiral arms like droplets of blood. But one sector remained frustratingly empty of red markers. Sector 7794, a sparse region containing only a few dozen star systems, most of them deemed unworthy of immediate conquest. It was there that the Third Fleet had been dispatched 3 months ago to deal with what intelligence reports had described as primitive resistance. Still no word from Admiral Thakmore? Kregstar growled, his voice a deep rumble that made the junior officers standing nearby flinch. None, Supreme Admiral, replied Captain Velthera, his second in command. Her own scales bore the scars of countless battles, and her voice carried the weight of genuine concern. The last transmission was 74 days ago, reporting successful engagement with a small defensive fleet around the third planet of the Sol system. Kregstar's tail lashed behind him, a sign of his growing irritation. In 12,000 years of conquest, the Vortak Empire had never lost contact with an entire fleet. Individual ships, yes. Small squadrons caught in unfavorable circumstances, occasionally. But, an entire fleet? 50 dreadnoughts carrying 100,000 of the Empire's finest warriors? It was inconceivable. What do we know about this species? He demanded, gesturing toward the holographic representation of the Sol system. A younger officer, Sub-Commander Zekhai, stepped forward nervously. His scales still bore the bright green coloring of youth, unmarked by battle scars. They call themselves humans, Supreme Admiral. Our initial scouts reported a Type II civilization on the galactic development scale. Primitive nuclear technology, basic space travel limited to their own system, no energy shields or plasma weaponry detected. Population? Kregstar asked, though he could already guess. Most species they encountered had populations in the hundreds of millions, sometimes low billions. Nothing that couldn't be exterminated within a few standard rotations. Approximately 8 billion, Supreme Admiral, Zekhai replied, consulting his datapad. Distributed primarily across their homeworld, with small colonies on 2 neighboring planets and various orbital stations. Kregstar snorted in derision. 8 billion soft-bodied creatures armed with primitive weapons against 100,000 Vortak warriors equipped with the finest military technology in the galaxy. It should have been over in days, not months. Show me their biological data, he commanded. The holographic display shifted, showing a 3-dimensional model of a human male. Kregstar studied it with growing bewilderment. The creature stood barely 6 feet tall, had no natural armor, no claws, no fangs worth mentioning. Its skin looked impossibly thin and vulnerable. According to the data scrolling beside the image, humans lived only 70 to 90 standard years, had poor natural night vision, and lacked the ability to regenerate lost limbs. "This is what stopped our third fleet?" Kregstar asked incredulously. "These soft things?" "The data appears accurate, Supreme Admiral," Sekai said carefully. "However, there may be factors we haven't yet considered. The humans seem to have developed certain adaptations." "Explain." "Their technology, while primitive by our standards, shows unusual innovation. They've developed weapons that use kinetic energy rather than plasma, and their defensive strategies appear to be highly unconventional. Also," Zekai hesitated. "Speak." "They don't seem to surrender, Supreme Admiral. Our scouts observed several engagements where human forces continued fighting even when facing overwhelming odds. Even when their defeat was mathematically certain." Kregstar's eyes narrowed. Every species they had conquered had eventually shown sense and surrendered when faced with annihilation. It was logical. It was natural. Even the most warlike races eventually recognized inevitable defeat and submitted to preserve what remained of their population. "Perhaps they simply don't understand the mathematics of warfare," Captain Velthara suggested. "Many primitive species fight longer than they should due to ignorance." "Perhaps," Kregstar mused, but something about that explanation felt insufficient. He had seen ignorance before. This felt different. A communications officer suddenly straightened at his station. "Supreme Admiral. Incoming transmission from the Fourth Fleet." Kregstar turned sharply. The Fourth Fleet was stationed 3 sectors away, dealing with the remnants of the Zeldan civilization. "Put it through." The holographic display shifted to show Admiral Mordash, his scales bearing the deep red coloring of a career military officer. But there was something in his eyes that Kregstar had never seen before: uncertainty. "Supreme Admiral," Mordash began, his voice tight with tension. "We've encountered unusual activity in our sector." "Define unusual." "Ships, Supreme Admiral. Unknown configuration, moving through our sector at high speed. They've been conducting what appear to be reconnaissance operations, mapping our fleet positions and defensive installations." Kregstar's claws extended slightly. "Identification?" "That's the concerning part, Supreme Admiral. The energy signatures match nothing in our databases, but the construction techniques, they're similar to what we observed from the human species in Sector 7794. A chill ran down Kregstar's spine, though he would never show such weakness in front of his subordinates. "How many ships?" "Difficult to determine, Supreme Admiral. They appear to be using some form of stealth technology we haven't encountered before. Our sensors detect them intermittently at best. But we've confirmed at least 30 vessels. 30 ships conducting reconnaissance 3 sectors away from their homeworld?" Kregstar's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You're certain these are human vessels?" "As certain as we can be, Supreme Admiral. The energy patterns are consistent with the primitive nuclear technology in our intelligence reports, but they've been modified somehow." "Enhanced." Kregstar disconnected the transmission and stood in silence for several moments, his tactical mind processing this new information. If humans had somehow developed stealth technology and were conducting reconnaissance operations across multiple sectors, it suggested a level of strategic thinking that contradicted their primitive classification. "Velthara," he said finally. "Prepare the First Fleet for immediate deployment to Sector 7794. "Supreme Admiral," she replied carefully, "that's 200 vessels. The entire core fleet. Are you certain such force is necessary against a primitive species?" Kregstar turned to look at her, his eyes cold with calculation. "Captain, we've just learned that a species we classified as primitive has potentially destroyed or captured our entire Third Fleet and is now conducting reconnaissance operations across multiple sectors. Either our intelligence was catastrophically wrong, or these humans possess capabilities we don't understand." He gestured to the holographic display showing the human male. "Look at this creature. No natural weapons, no armor, laughably short lifespan. By every measure we use to evaluate potential threats, they should be incapable of meaningful resistance. Yet somehow, 100,000 Vorthak warriors have vanished. The command center had grown quiet, every officer listening intently to their Supreme Admiral's analysis. There are only two possibilities, Kregstar continued. Either the Third Fleet encountered some unknown external threat in that sector, or these humans are far more dangerous than they appear. Given that human ships are now operating in sectors far from their homeworld, I believe we're dealing with the latter. He turned back to the holographic display, zooming in on the Sol system. Subcommander Zekai, I want every piece of intelligence we have on human behavior, culture, and military doctrine. I want to understand not just their technology, but how they think. Yes, Supreme Admiral. And send word to all fleet commanders in surrounding sectors. Any vessels matching human energy signatures are to be tracked and reported immediately, but not engaged. I want to understand the scope of their operations before we commit to battle. As his officers dispersed to carry out his orders, Kregstar remained before the holographic display, studying the innocuous blue dot that represented the human homeworld. In 12,000 years of conquest, he had developed an instinct for recognizing dangerous opponents. The fact that he couldn't immediately understand the threat these humans represented only made them more dangerous in his estimation. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that perhaps the age of easy conquest was coming to an end. He pushed the thought aside and focused on tactical preparations. Whatever these humans were capable of, they would soon face the full might of the Vorthak Empire's First Fleet. But, as he stared at that small blue world, Admiral Kregstar couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial, something that would prove to be the difference between victory and an unthinkable defeat. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be the apex predator. And, in the depths of space, human ships continued their silent reconnaissance, gathering intelligence and preparing for a war that would test the very limits of their species' remarkable capacity for survival and adaptation. The hunt was about to begin, but the question remained, who was really the predator, and who was the prey? The journey to Sector 7794 took the First Fleet 18 standard days, during which Admiral Kregstar pored over every fragment of intelligence about the humans. What he discovered only deepened his confusion and, though he would never admit it, his growing unease. The humans were indeed primitive by Vorthak standards, but their primitiveness was accompanied by something the Empire had never encountered before: absolute unpredictability. Where other species developed along logical technological paths, humans seemed to leap between innovations in chaotic bursts of creativity. They had developed nuclear weapons before achieving efficient space travel, created global communication networks before establishing basic planetary unity, and somehow managed to survive their own technological adolescence without destroying themselves. More disturbing were the historical records his intelligence officers had managed to intercept from human databases during the Third Fleet's operation. Humans were not just warriors, they were survivors. Their own planet had tried to kill them repeatedly through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, and natural disasters, and each time they had not merely survived but grown stronger. They had fought wars against their own species for millennia, developing tactics and strategies that showed a disturbing understanding of both conventional and unconventional warfare. But, most unsettling of all was their apparent inability to recognize when they were defeated. Supreme Admiral, Captain Velfera interrupted his brooding as she entered his private command chamber. We've arrived at the edge of Sector 7794. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple anomalies. Kregstar followed her to the main command deck, where the massive viewscreen showed the star field ahead of them. To the naked eye, it appeared empty, but the sensor readings told a different story. Report, he ordered. Subcommander Zekai stepped forward, his young features tight with concern. Supreme Admiral, we're detecting debris fields in 3 different locations. The energy signatures are consistent with Vorthak vessels. Kregstar felt his blood chill, but his expression remained impassive. Survivors? None detected, Supreme Admiral. Put the nearest debris field on screen. The viewscreen shifted to show a magnified view of twisted metal drifting in the void. Kregstar recognized the distinctive hull plating of Vorthak dreadnoughts, but the pieces were scattered across thousands of kilometers. Whatever had happened here, it had been devastating. How many ships? He asked quietly. Based on the debris analysis, approximately 15 to 20 vessels, Supreme Admiral. Kregstar's claws unconsciously extended. 20 Vorthak dreadnoughts represented the firepower to sterilize an entire planet. Each ship carried 2,000 warriors and enough weaponry to level continents. The fact that they had been reduced to floating scrap metal was almost incomprehensible. Any indication of what weapons were used against them? Zekai consulted his readings with obvious reluctance. The damage patterns are inconsistent with known weapon types, Supreme Admiral. Some sections show evidence of massive kinetic impact, others appear to have been subjected to extreme heat, and still others show signs of internal explosions. Internal explosions? Yes, Supreme Admiral. As if the ships were somehow compromised from within before being destroyed. Before Kregstar could process this information further, the communications officer called out urgently. Supreme Admiral. Incoming transmission from the advanced scouts. Put it through. The viewscreen split to show Commander Rathkol, leader of the scout squadron Kregstar had sent ahead to reconnoiter the Sol system. The veteran warrior's usual composure was nowhere to be seen. Supreme Admiral, you need to see this, Rathkol said without preamble. We've reached the human homeworld, and it's impossible. Explain yourself, Commander. Supreme Admiral, according to our intelligence, this species should have been extinct after the Third Fleet's engagement. But the planet shows no signs of bombardment damage. In fact, they appear to have expanded their defensive capabilities significantly. Kregstar leaned forward. Show me. The transmission shifted to display long-range sensor data of the Sol system. What Kregstar saw made no sense. Instead of the devastated ruins he expected to find, the human homeworld showed increased orbital activity. Multiple space stations, defensive platforms, and what appeared to be massive industrial complexes had been constructed around the planet and its moon. How long since the Third Fleet's last transmission? Kregstar asked, though he already knew the answer. 74 days, Supreme Admiral. Kregstar stared at the display in disbelief. In less than 3 months, the humans had not only survived an encounter with 50 Vorthak dreadnoughts but had somehow used that time to significantly expand their defensive infrastructure. The industrial capacity required for such expansion should have been impossible for a species of their technological level. Commander, are you detecting any Vorthak technology signatures in their constructions? There was a pause before Rathkol responded. Yes, Supreme Admiral. Significant Vorthak energy signatures integrated throughout their defensive networks. They appear to have salvaged our technology and incorporated it into their own systems. The implications hit Kregstar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just survived the Third Fleet's attack, they had somehow captured Vorthak vessels intact and reverse-engineered the technology in a matter of weeks. The technological leap required for such rapid adaptation should have taken decades, if not centuries. Any signs of Third Fleet personnel? Unknown, Supreme Admiral. However, we have detected what appear to be Vorthak biosignatures on several of the orbital installations. Prisoners? Possibly, Supreme Admiral. But the humans appear to be using them for something. The biosignatures are active and moving, suggesting they're alive, but their locations suggest they're involved in the construction operations. Kregstar's mind reeled. The Vorthak had never taken prisoners, they had always fought to the death rather than face capture. The idea that Vorthak warriors were not only alive but apparently cooperating with their captors was beyond comprehension. Supreme Admiral, Velthara said quietly beside him, perhaps we should consider the possibility that the Third Fleet survivors are being forced to cooperate. Humans might have developed some form of neural control technology. Before Kregstar could respond, proximity alarms began blaring throughout the command deck. The tactical officer's voice cut through the noise, Supreme Admiral. Multiple contacts approaching at high speed. They appeared from nowhere. Kregstar spun toward the tactical display, where dozens of red dots had suddenly materialized around the First Fleet's position. The contacts were moving impossibly fast, weaving between the Vortak vessels with precision that suggested they knew exactly where each ship would be. Impossible, Velthara breathed. Our sensors show nothing until they were practically on top of us. Identify those vessels. Krekstar barked. Energy signatures match human technology, but, enhanced with Vortak modifications, the tactical officer reported. Estimated size, approximately 1/10 the mass of our dreadnoughts. Krekstar stared at the display. Tiny human vessels, no larger than Vortak fighters, were surrounding his massive fleet of 200 dreadnoughts. It should have been laughable. Instead, something cold was growing in his chest. Open a communications channel, he ordered. Let me speak to whoever commands these insects. Static filled the audio system for a moment before a voice emerged, unmistakably alien, but speaking perfect Vortak. Admiral Krekstar of the Vortak First Fleet, the voice said calmly. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. You are trespassing in human space. The casual tone, the lack of fear or respect, sent a jolt of rage through Krekstar. Human, you are addressing the Supreme Admiral of the Vortak Empire. Your species will surrender immediately or face complete annihilation. There was what sounded like quiet laughter before Chen responded. Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your Third Fleet thought the same thing when they arrived here 3 months ago. Where are my warriors? Krekstar demanded. Safe, Chen replied. And, learning. We found that most intelligent species, when given the choice between death and cooperation, choose cooperation. Even proud Vortak warriors, it turns out. The implications of her words sent ice through Krekstar's veins. You're saying my warriors betrayed the Empire? I'm saying your warriors discovered that there are alternatives to conquest and extermination. Some of them have provided valuable assistance in upgrading our defenses. In return, we've shown them what human civilization is actually like, rather than what Vortak propaganda told them to expect. Krekstar looked around his command deck, noting the expressions of confusion and growing fear on his officers' faces. The idea that Vortak warriors could be turned against the Empire was unthinkable, yet the evidence was literally surrounding them. You have 60 seconds to surrender your fleet, Chen continued. After that, we'll demonstrate why the Third Fleet chose to join us rather than continue fighting. You're threatening me with a handful of tiny ships? Krekstar snarled. I have 200 dreadnoughts. Admiral, size isn't everything. You're about to learn something that humans figured out a long time ago. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that doesn't look like a predator at all. Before Krekstar could respond, the human ships moved. But they didn't attack in any conventional sense. Instead, they began broadcasting something, a complex signal that his communications officer couldn't immediately identify. Supreme Admiral, the communications officer called out in panic, they're transmitting directly to our ship's computer systems. Our defensive protocols are being compromised. Krekstar watched in horror as his tactical display began showing system failures across the fleet. One by one, his dreadnoughts were reporting loss of weapons control, navigation failures, and complete communications blackouts. The humans weren't destroying his ships, they were taking control of them. How is this possible? Velthara whispered. On the viewscreen, Admiral Chen's face appeared, a small, unremarkable human female with graying hair and calm eyes. She looked exactly like what she was, a middle-aged human who should have posed no threat to anyone. Admiral Krekstar, she said gently, your empire has spent 12,000 years conquering through superior technology and brute force. But you've never faced a species that fights with their minds instead of their claws. What have you done to my ships? We've introduced a computer virus based on Vortak programming that your Third Fleet helped us develop. It's specifically designed to take advantage of the standardized systems used throughout your empire. Think of it as evolution in action. Krekstar felt his world tilting as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. The humans had not only captured his Third Fleet but had somehow convinced them to betray every principle the Vortak Empire stood for. And now those same humans were demonstrating that they had turned the Empire's own technological superiority against itself. This is impossible, he said, though even as he spoke, he could see more systems failing across his fleet. Admiral, Chen said with what almost sounded like sympathy, humans have been fighting impossible odds for our entire evolutionary history. We've learned to be very, very good at turning disadvantages into advantages. As the last of the ship's weapons systems went offline, Admiral Kregstar began to understand that he was facing something the Vortak Empire had never encountered before, a species that fought not with strength, but with intelligence, creativity, and an absolutely terrifying refusal to accept defeat. The age of Vortak supremacy was ending, and it was ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, methodical efficiency of a species that had learned to be the ultimate survivors. Admiral Kregstar found himself aboard a human vessel for the first time in his life, and everything about the experience defied his expectations. Instead of the cramped, utilitarian design he anticipated from a primitive species, the ship's interior was spacious and surprisingly comfortable. What disturbed him most, however, was that it was partially built using Vortak technology, but not in any way his engineers would have designed it. The humans had taken Vortak power systems, weapons, and defensive technologies and integrated them seamlessly with their own innovations, creating something that was neither purely human nor purely Vortak, but somehow superior to both. It was adaptation on a scale that should have been impossible. Admiral Sarah Chen led him through the corridors toward what she called the briefing room. She was smaller than most humans he had observed, yet she moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her ability to handle any situation. Other humans they passed showed similar behavior, none of them seemed impressed or intimidated by his presence, despite the fact that he could easily kill any of them with his bear claws. "I know what you're thinking," Chen said without turning around. "You're wondering why my people aren't afraid of you." Kregstar said nothing, but she was correct. Every other species he had encountered had shown immediate fear when confronted with a Vortak warrior. Fear was natural. Fear was logical. These humans showed nothing but calm curiosity. "The answer is simple," Chen continued. "Fear is useful when it helps you survive. But we've learned that fear of something you can fight is just wasted energy. And, Admiral, despite your impressive physical capabilities, you're something we can fight." They entered a large chamber where several dozen humans were seated around a holographic display table. At first, Kregstar assumed they were all military personnel, but, as he looked closer, he realized that many of them wore no uniforms at all. Some appeared to be scientists, others looked like engineers or technicians, and a few seemed to be civilians entirely. "Let me introduce you to humanity's greatest weapon," Chen said, gesturing to the assembled group. "Diversity of thought." Kregstar's confusion must have shown on his face, because Chen smiled slightly before continuing. "Admiral, your empire conquers through standardization. Your ships all use the same designs, your tactics follow the same patterns, your warriors all think in the same ways. It's efficient, and it's served you well for 12,000 years. But it has one critical weakness." She activated the holographic display, which showed a tactical representation of the recent engagement. "When you encounter something truly different, something that doesn't follow your established patterns, your entire system becomes a liability instead of an asset." Dr. James Harrison, the elderly human physicist who had been instrumental in reverse engineering Vortak technology, stood up from the table. "Admiral Kregstar, may I ask you a question?" Kregstar nodded grudgingly. "In your military academies, how many different approaches to space combat do you teach?" "We teach the optimal approach," Kregstar replied. "Why would we waste time on inferior methods?" Dr. Harrison smiled. "That's exactly the difference. In human military academies, we teach dozens of different approaches. Some are clearly superior in most situations, but we've learned that there's no such thing as universally optimal strategy. Every approach has situations where it's the best choice, and situations where it's completely wrong." A younger woman, introduced as Commander Lisa Rodriguez, activated another section of the holographic display. "When your third fleet arrived at Earth, they used textbook Vortak tactics. Overwhelming force applied directly to what they perceived as our strongest defensive positions. It was logical, efficient, and exactly what we expected them to do. Because," Chen added, "we'd spent 3 months studying the data from every Vortak conquest we could find records of. Your empire is remarkably consistent in its approach. Kregstar felt a chill as the implications became clear. You were preparing for our arrival? Admiral, we've been preparing for contact with hostile alien species since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be out there. When we detected your scout ships 8 months ago, we immediately began developing contingency plans. The holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be a massive industrial complex hidden within an asteroid field. This is Production Facility Omega, built inside a hollowed-out asteroid in our system's outer belt. We constructed it specifically to develop countermeasures against superior alien technology. Dr. Harrison gestured to another display showing complex technical schematics. The moment we recovered the first pieces of Vorthack technology from disabled scout ships, our best minds began working to understand not just how your systems worked, but how they could be compromised. It took us 6 weeks to crack your computer systems, added a young man introduced as Dr. Kevin Park, who looked barely old enough to be out of school. Your technology is incredibly advanced, but it's also incredibly standardized. Once we understood the basic architecture, we could predict how every system in your fleet would respond to specific inputs. Commander Rodriguez pulled up another display showing what appeared to be a complex training simulation. While our scientists were working on technical solutions, our military strategists were developing tactical approaches based on human historical precedent. Historical precedent? Kregstar asked. Admiral, humans have been fighting asymmetric warfare for thousands of years. Small forces defeating larger ones, technologically inferior armies overcoming superior ones, desperate defenders finding ways to turn their disadvantages into advantages. We have extensive historical data on how to fight enemies who should be able to crush us. Chen activated a new section of the display showing what appeared to be a timeline of human conflicts. We've fought wars where one side had overwhelming technological advantages, superior weapons, better armor, faster transportation, more advanced communication systems. And we've learned that technological superiority means nothing if your enemy can find ways to neutralize or turn that technology against you. Kregstar studied the displayed information with growing unease. These humans weren't just tactically creative, they were systematically studying the art of defeating superior opponents. It was as if their entire species had been preparing for this conflict for centuries without even knowing what they would be fighting. The computer virus that disabled your fleet, Dr. Park explained, was based on techniques human hackers developed fighting our own computer security systems. We've spent decades learning how to compromise our own technology, which gave us the foundation to compromise yours. But the virus was only part of our strategy, Commander Rodriguez added. We also used psychological warfare, misinformation, and strategic deception to ensure your fleet would be in exactly the position we needed them to be when we made our move. Admiral Chen pulled up a new display showing communication logs. Your third fleet received carefully crafted false intelligence about our defensive capabilities. We made sure they believed we were weaker than we actually were, while simultaneously hiding our true preparations. Kregstar examined the logs with growing horror. The intelligence reports his own forces had sent back to Vorthack Command were completely wrong. Every piece of data about human capabilities had been deliberately manipulated to lead the Empire's forces into a trap. You fed us false information for months? Admiral, deception is one of humanity's oldest survival strategies. We've been practicing it on each other for millennia. Applying it to an alien invasion was just a matter of scale. Dr. Harrison activated another section of the display. But, perhaps most importantly, we did something your empire has never encountered. We studied your prisoners not as enemies to be destroyed, but as individuals to be understood. The display showed what appeared to be comfortable living quarters, workshops, and recreational areas. When we captured the first Vorthack personnel, we didn't torture them for information or execute them as examples. We talked to them. Talked to them? Admiral, we learned about Vorthack culture, history, and individual motivations. We discovered that many of your warriors had never actually chosen to be conquerors, they were simply born into a society where conquest was the only path to survival and advancement. Commander Rodriguez gestured to a section of the display showing what appeared to be collaborative work sessions. When we offered them alternatives, the chance to use their skills for construction instead of destruction, the opportunity to explore and learn instead of simply conquering, many of them were genuinely interested. That's impossible, Kregstar said, but his voice lacked conviction. Vorthak warriors are loyal to the Empire. Admiral, Chen said gently, Vorthak warriors are individuals first. Once they realized that humans weren't the monsters your propaganda had told them to expect, many of them began questioning what they had been taught about the righteousness of your Empire's mission. The holographic display shifted to show video recordings of Vorthak warriors working alongside humans, engaged in what appeared to be friendly conversations, even participating in what looked like recreational activities. We offered them something your Empire never could, Dr. Harrison explained. The chance to be valued for their knowledge and abilities rather than just their capacity for violence. Kregstar stared at the recordings, recognizing several of the warriors as veterans he had personally commended for their service. Seeing them apparently content in human captivity was more disturbing than any military defeat could have been. You're telling me that my warriors betrayed their own species for comfortable accommodations? Admiral, Chen said seriously, we're telling you that your warriors discovered that they didn't have to choose between loyalty to their people and opposing a system of endless conquest. We've shown them that there are other ways for the Vorthak to survive and thrive in the galaxy. She activated a final display showing what appeared to be a detailed plan for peaceful coexistence between species. This is what we're offering your Empire, Admiral. Not surrender, not subjugation, but partnership. Kregstar studied the plan with growing amazement. It was comprehensive, detailed, and offered solutions to resource competition, territorial disputes, and technological exchange that could benefit both species enormously. You developed this entire framework in 3 months? Admiral, humans have been thinking about how to achieve peace between conflicting groups for thousands of years. We've had plenty of practice. As Kregstar absorbed the implications of what he was seeing, he began to understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their tactics, or their adaptability. It was their fundamental approach to conflict itself. Where the Vorthak saw every encounter as a contest between predator and prey, humans saw every encounter as a problem to be solved. And they had become extraordinarily good at solving problems that seemed impossible. 3 days after his capture, Admiral Kregstar was given something he had never experienced in his life: complete freedom to explore and observe without restriction. Admiral Chen had simply told him he was welcome to go anywhere on the human vessels or installations, speak to anyone he wished, and see anything that interested him. The only requirement was that a human escort accompany him for translation purposes. His escort turned out to be Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a xenobiologist who had been studying Vorthak physiology and culture since the first prisoners arrived. She was a small, elderly human woman who spoke fluent Vorthak and seemed genuinely excited to have the opportunity to learn more about his species. Admiral, she said as they walked through the corridors of the massive space station that had been built in the 3 months since the Third Fleet's capture, I hope you don't mind my asking, but I'm curious about something. Kregstar had grown somewhat accustomed to human directness over the past few days. Ask your question. What did you think would happen to your species if you conquered everyone in the galaxy? The question caught him off guard. We would rule. We would have unlimited resources. We would be secure. Dr. Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. But then, what? I mean, after you had conquered everyone, what would the Vorthak Empire do next? Kregstar found himself without an immediate answer. In 12,000 years of expansion, the Empire had never seriously considered what would happen when there was nothing left to conquer. The assumption had always been that conquest would continue indefinitely. I suppose, we would focus on maintaining control over our territories. That sounds rather boring for a species that seems to thrive on challenge and achievement, Dr. Tanaka said mildly. Would your warriors be satisfied spending their lives maintaining control over defeated enemies? Before Kregstar could answer, they entered a workshop where several Vorthak engineers were working alongside humans on what appeared to be a new type of spacecraft. The design was unlike anything Kregstar had seen before. It combined Vorthak engineering principles with human innovation in ways that seemed to enhance both. Supreme Admiral. One of the Vorthak engineers, a veteran named Thakvel, approached them with obvious excitement. "You must see this design we've developed. It's an exploration vessel capable of reaching other galaxies." Krekstar stared at his subordinate in amazement. Thakvel had always been a competent engineer, but Krekstar had never seen him display such enthusiasm for anything. "Other galaxies?" "Yes, Supreme Admiral. The humans have shown us long-range sensor data indicating dozens of galaxies within potential reach. Imagine entire galaxies filled with new phenomena to study, new worlds to explore, new species to meet." Dr. Tanaka smiled at Krekstar's expression. "Admiral, one of the first things we learned about your people is that they're naturally curious and highly intelligent. But your empire has channeled that curiosity into conquest instead of exploration." She gestured to another workstation where a mixed team of humans and Vorthak were examining what appeared to be stellar cartography data. "When we showed your engineers our astronomical databases and explained our plans for eventual intergalactic exploration, many of them became extremely interested in the technical challenges involved." Thakvel brought up a holographic display showing the new ship design. "Supreme Admiral, this vessel would be capable of carrying mixed crews on journeys lasting decades or even centuries. The humans have developed remarkable life support systems, and our engineering expertise allows for the kind of durability required for such long voyages." Krekstar examined the design with growing amazement. It was ambitious beyond anything the Empire had ever attempted, and yet the technical specifications appeared sound. Why would humans want to work with Vorthak on such projects? Dr. Tanaka gestured to a wall display showing images from various human exploration missions throughout their own solar system. "Admiral, humans are explorers by nature. We've always been driven to see what's beyond the next horizon. But we've also learned that exploration is more successful when different groups work together, bringing different skills and perspectives to the challenges involved." They moved to another section of the workshop where a human physicist was explaining something called quantum mechanics to a group of fascinated Vorthak scientists. The concepts being discussed were clearly beyond Krekstar's expertise, but the enthusiasm of both humans and Vorthak was obvious. "Your people have an excellent understanding of large-scale engineering and energy management," the physicist was saying. "But you focused primarily on military applications. The same principles could be applied to much more ambitious projects." One of the Vorthak scientists, a younger female named Kiriseth, asked, "Could these principles be used to develop faster-than-light communication across galactic distances?" "That's exactly what we're hoping to find out," the physicist replied. "With Vorthak expertise in energy manipulation and human knowledge of quantum physics, we might be able to develop communication systems that would allow real-time coordination across an entire galaxy." Krekstar realized that he was looking at something unprecedented: Vorthak and human scientists working together not to develop better weapons, but to push the boundaries of knowledge itself. "This is what we're offering your empire," Dr. Tanaka said quietly. "Not replacement of Vorthak culture, but expansion of Vorthak potential." They continued their tour, visiting sections of the station where Vorthak warriors were learning what humans called conflict resolution, techniques for resolving disputes without violence. Krekstar watched with fascination as his own soldiers engaged in role-playing exercises designed to help them understand how to de-escalate tense situations. "At first, many of your warriors were skeptical," Dr. Tanaka explained. "They believed that non-violent conflict resolution was a sign of weakness. But when we showed them the mathematical advantages, how much more efficient it is to resolve conflicts through negotiation rather than warfare, many of them became interested in learning these techniques." In another section, they found Vorthak personnel working with human agriculturalists to develop food production systems that could support both species on long space voyages. The collaboration had led to innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. "Admiral, Dr. Tanaka said as they paused to watch a mixed group of humans and Vorthak celebrating the successful test of a new hydroponic system, "May I ask you something personal?" Krekstar nodded. "When did you personally last feel genuine excitement about your work?" The question hit him unexpectedly hard. Krekstar tried to remember the last time he had felt the kind of enthusiasm he was seeing in his own people, but couldn't identify a specific moment. Conquest had become routine, victories had become expected, and success had become merely the absence of failure. "I cannot recall," he admitted. "That's what we thought," Dr. Tanaka said sadly. "Admiral, from our observations, Vortac culture has become trapped in a cycle of conquest that no longer serves your people's deeper needs. You've become so focused on external expansion that you've stopped growing internally." They entered what appeared to be a recreational area where humans and Vortac were engaged in various activities together. Some were playing strategic games, others were sharing stories about their respective homeworlds, and still others were collaborating on artistic projects that combined elements from both cultures. "What you're seeing here," Dr. Tanaka explained, "is something humans call cultural exchange. Both species learn from each other, and both become stronger as a result." Kregstar watched a group of young humans listening with obvious fascination as an elderly Vortac warrior told stories about the early days of the Empire. The warrior was clearly enjoying the attention and the opportunity to share his knowledge with an appreciative audience. "Your empire has taught your people that interaction with other species must be either conquest or submission," Dr. Tanaka continued. "But humans have learned that there's a third option, mutual benefit." In the center of the recreational area, a large holographic display showed what appeared to be architectural plans for a massive construction project. "What is that?" Kregstar asked. "Those are preliminary designs for a joint research station that would be built in the space between our two territories," Dr. Tanaka replied. "It would serve as a neutral meeting place where scientists, engineers, artists, and philosophers from both species could work together on projects of mutual interest." Kregstar studied the plans with growing amazement. The station was designed to accommodate the different physiological needs of both species while providing facilities for every type of collaborative work he could imagine. "You're planning to build this regardless of whether the Empire agrees to peace?" "Admiral, we're planning to build this because we believe the Empire will eventually agree to peace. Not because they're forced to, but because they'll realize that cooperation offers them more than conquest ever could." As they completed their tour and returned to the guest quarters where Kregstar was staying, Dr. Tanaka paused outside his door. "Admiral, I want you to know that everything you've seen today is being recorded and transmitted back to your empire. We're not trying to hide what we're doing here." "Why?" "Because we want every Vortac in your empire to see what their lives could be like if they chose cooperation over conquest. We want them to see their own people thriving in ways they never could under the current system." That night, alone in his quarters, Kregstar found himself facing a choice that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. He could contact the Empire and report that humanity represented a threat that needed to be destroyed at any cost. Or he could recommend something that no Vortac admiral had ever recommended, that the Empire consider the possibility that they might be wrong about what it meant to be the galaxy's dominant species. As he stared out at the stars through his chamber's viewport, Kregstar realized that for the first time in his life, he was looking forward to tomorrow not because it would bring new conquests, but because it would bring new possibilities. The choice between worlds wasn't just about territory or resources. It was about what kind of future the Vortac species wanted to create for itself. 6 months after his capture, Admiral Kregstar stood before the assembled High Council of the Vortac Empire, delivering a report that would change the course of galactic history. The massive chamber, carved from the living rock of the Empire's capital world, had witnessed 12,000 years of conquest planning. Today, for the first time, it would hear an argument for peace. "Honored counselors," Kregstar began, his voice carrying the authority of a lifetime of military service, "I stand before you to report that the human species represents not a threat to be eliminated, but an opportunity that could transform our empire into something greater than we have ever imagined." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Grand Admiral Vexthor, Supreme Commander of all Vortac forces, leaned forward in his seat. "Admiral Kregstar, your previous reports suggested that humans had somehow corrupted our forces through unknown means. Are you now claiming that this corruption was beneficial?" "Grand Admiral, I'm claiming that what we interpreted as corruption was actually enlightenment." Kregstar activated the holographic display system, showing detailed recordings of everything he had observed aboard the human installations. "What you are about to see will challenge every assumption our empire has held about the nature of galactic dominance. For the next 3 hours, Kregstar presented evidence that systematically dismantled the Empire's fundamental worldview. He showed Vorthack engineers collaborating with humans on technologies that surpassed anything either species had achieved alone. He demonstrated how former Vorthack warriors had found purposes more fulfilling than conquest. He displayed the mathematical proof that cooperation generated more resources than subjugation ever could. But, most importantly, he showed them the faces of their own people, Vorthack citizens who had discovered joy in creation rather than destruction. The humans have proven something we believed impossible, Kregstar concluded. They have shown that strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the ability to build. Not from the capacity to conquer, but from the wisdom to unite. Counselor Zeth Kara, eldest member of the High Council, spoke with the weight of centuries behind her words. Admiral Kregstar, what you described sounds like surrender with additional steps. How can you guarantee that these humans will not eventually turn against us once they have gained access to our technology and knowledge? Kregstar had anticipated this question. Honored Counselor, humans have had access to our technology for 6 months. They have had complete control over 200 of our finest vessels and access to our most classified military information. If they intended treachery, they have had ample opportunity. He activated a new section of the holographic display, showing the current disposition of human forces throughout their territory. Instead of using our technology to build weapons of conquest, they have used it to construct research facilities, exploration vessels, and defensive installations designed to protect not just human worlds, but any species that chooses to join their alliance. Grand Admiral Vexthor studied the display with obvious skepticism. Alliance? Yes, Grand Admiral. The humans have been contacted by 17 different species in the past 6 months. Species that had hidden from our empire, species that had survived our previous conquests by concealing themselves, and species from distant regions of the galaxy who had heard about the human resistance to our forces. Kregstar highlighted several sections of the galaxy map where new civilizations had apparently emerged from concealment. These species are offering to join what the humans call the Galactic Cooperation Initiative. Not as subjects or vassals, but as equal partners in galactic exploration and development. The implications sent a murmur through the assembled counselors. For the first time in the Empire's history, they were facing not just a single resistant species, but a growing alliance of civilizations united specifically to oppose Vorthack expansion. How many ships do they have? Vexthor asked grimly. Grand Admiral, that's the wrong question. Kregstar changed the display to show technological and industrial capacity data. The correct question is, how quickly can they build ships? And the answer is, faster than we can destroy them. The data was sobering. The combined industrial capacity of the Alliance species, enhanced by shared human and Vorthack technology, exceeded the Empire's production capabilities by a significant margin. More importantly, Kregstar continued, they're not building ships of war. They're building ships of exploration, research, and peaceful contact. Every vessel they construct represents an opportunity to find new allies and new knowledge. Counselor Morthek, youngest member of the High Council, raised a question that had clearly been troubling him. Admiral Kregstar, if humans are truly peaceful as you suggest, how did they defeat our Third Fleet so decisively? Counselor, they defeated our Third Fleet the same way they proposed to defeat our entire empire, by making conquest more expensive than cooperation. Kregstar pulled up tactical data from the original engagement. They didn't destroy our forces through superior firepower. They neutralized them through superior strategy, then offered our personnel something better than victory, purpose. He showed detailed interviews with Third Fleet survivors, each explaining why they had chosen to work with humans rather than fight them. Commander Rathvel said it best, for the first time in my life, I'm helping to build something that will last longer than my next conquest. Grand Admiral Vexthor stood and walked to the center of the chamber, his massive form casting shadows across the holographic displays. Admiral Kregstar, even if everything you say is true, you're asking us to abandon 12,000 years of successful expansion. You're asking us to trust that these humans will honor their agreements when they could simply wait for us to become dependent on cooperation and, then, destroy us. Grand Admiral, Krekstar replied carefully, I'm asking you to consider what our empire will look like in another 12,000 years if we continue on our current path. He activated a new projection showing mathematical models of continued expansion. We currently control approximately 18% of our galaxy. At our historical rate of conquest, accounting for increasing resistance and longer supply lines, we would achieve complete galactic domination in roughly 30,000 years. The projection continued, showing the implications of such dominance. At that point, we would control a galaxy containing nothing but subjugated species, depleted resources, and a Vortac population that has spent 30,000 years knowing nothing but warfare. And then, what? Krekstar asked the assembled council. What happens to the Vortac spirit when there are no more challenges to face? What happens to our people when victory becomes meaningless because there are no more enemies to defeat? The chamber fell silent as the councillors contemplated this question that had never been asked in the Empire's history. The humans have shown us an alternative, Krekstar continued. Instead of conquering the galaxy, we could explore it. Instead of ruling over defeated enemies, we could collaborate with willing partners. Instead of fighting for territory, we could work together to reach other galaxies entirely. Councillor Zefkara leaned forward. And, you believe this alternative would satisfy the Vortac need for challenge and achievement? Honored Councillor, I have seen our own engineers more excited about building an intergalactic exploration vessel than they ever were about designing new weapons. I have watched our warriors find greater satisfaction in protecting mixed colonies than they ever found in destroying enemy settlements. Krekstar activated one final holographic display, showing the proposed joint research station that would serve as the first permanent cooperation facility between the Empire and the Alliance. This station represents something unprecedented in galactic history, a place where different species work together not because one conquered the other, but because they choose to combine their strengths for mutual benefit. Grand Admiral Vexthor studied the station designs for several long minutes before speaking. Admiral Krekstar, you're recommending that the Empire agree to formal peace negotiations with this human alliance? Grand Admiral, I'm recommending that the Empire recognize that true strength lies not in the ability to conquer, but in the wisdom to know when conquest is no longer the path to greatness. The vote, when it came, was closer than Krekstar had dared hope, 7 councillors in favor of peace negotiations, 5 opposed. It was enough. 3 months later, Admiral Krekstar stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Cooperation Station Alpha, watching as the first joint exploration fleet prepared for its maiden voyage. The fleet consisted of vessels from 7 different species, crewed by individuals who had chosen cooperation over conquest, exploration over expansion. Admiral Sarachin joined him at the observation window, both of them watching as Vortac engineers worked alongside human scientists to make final preparations for the launch. Any regrets, Admiral? Chen asked. Krekstar considered the question seriously before answering. I regret that it took 12,000 years for my people to learn what yours discovered much earlier, that the strongest predator is one that doesn't need to hunt. As the exploration fleet departed for the intergalactic void, carrying representatives of a dozen species toward discoveries that none could achieve alone, Krekstar realized that the age of galactic predators had indeed ended. In its place had begun something far more remarkable, the age of galactic cooperation. The humans had taught the galaxy that true dominance didn't come from conquering your neighbors. It came from inspiring them to join you in reaching for the stars. And, in the vast darkness between galaxies, new worlds awaited, worlds that would be explored not by conquerors seeking to expand their territories, but by partners seeking to expand their understanding of what was possible when different species chose to work together rather than fight each other. The greatest hunt in galactic history had ended not with the victory of predator over prey, but with the recognition that both were stronger when they chose to walk the same path toward an infinite frontier.